And I just feel like we've been living separate lives for a while now, Ellis. You must feel that too, right? That was the fourth time she'd said, I feel, in under 2 minutes. She was standing there in her freshly ironed beige trench coat, suitcase parked by the door like it had somewhere more exciting to be. Her eyeliner didn't smudge. Her voice didn't shake. She even had the audacity to look a little proud of herself, like this whole performance had been rehearsed. And maybe it had. Maybe Clay helped her write it. I sat on the armrest of the sofa, staring at the edge of her boot heel as it rocked slightly against the hardwood. There was lasagna still on the stove. Our dog, my dog now, I guess, was curled up by the window, sensing something off but staying quiet. Unlike me, he doesn't overthink. He just knows when something stinks. I didn't ask where she was going. I already knew. The Uber had pulled up 2 minutes earlier. I saw the notification flash on her phone while she talked about growth and self-exploration. She didn't use the word affair. Of course not. That would ruin the pretty little script. Too harsh, too real. No, she called it rediscovering her happiness. I guess she left out the part where her happiness had a six-pack, drove a Tesla, and called her sweetness in texts I wish I hadn't seen. You'd think I'd be yelling by now. You'd think I'd be asking questions. You'd think I'd at least say, is this really happening? But I didn't. I just watched her lips move. Her earrings shimmered when she turned her head. She was already gone. It was just the ghost of her finishing the paperwork. And when she finally said, I hope one day you'll understand, that was my cue. I stood up. Not fast. Not slow. Just enough to make her shift awkwardly and pause. I walked into the hallway, took the envelope I'd left under the coat rack and handed it to her. She took it like it was a receipt at a gas station. No curiosity. No questions. Then she opened it, and her face broke for the first time. Inside were the divorce papers. And a photograph. Her. Clay. Our backyard. 4th of July. She thought I was inside sleeping. I watched her throat tighten. I saw her eyes dart around for something, an excuse, an exit, an explanation. But I wasn't interested in any of those. I turned around, grabbed my keys, and said, you can finish your speech later. I'm done being the audience. Then I walked out. No shouting. No smashing plates. No begging. Just the quiet click of a door that would never open for her again. The silence in my car was loud enough to drown out the engine. I drove without music, without destination, without purpose, just forward. I didn't cry. I didn't even blink that much. My eyes just stung like I'd stared too long at something I should have turned away from years ago. The traffic lights passed over me like waves. Green. Red. Yellow. Nothing registered. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel, but I didn't feel them. I kept hearing that last moment over and over, Lorna's breath catching when she saw the photo. The second her mask slipped. It was such a small detail, but I've replayed it endlessly. That millisecond of panic in her eyes before she buried it again under all that calm, curated detachment. She thought I wouldn't know. She thought I'd never look closely enough to notice the way his hand was on her hip, not casually, but like he had ownership. In my yard. Behind the hydrangeas I planted the year we moved in. That photograph? I didn't take it. My neighbor, Jenna, did. She's 73, nosy, and lives with 3 cats and a pair of binoculars. She caught them that afternoon, texted me saying, hey Han, is this normal? Didn't think you had a twin. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Maybe a blurry image, a trick of the light, or maybe just Clay standing too close. But there was no mistaking the way Lorna smiled at him, like she used to smile at me when we were still real. It was that smile that finally cracked me open. I'd been telling myself for months that something was off, that her absences were about work, that her coldness was stress. But that smile in the picture, genuine, warm, intimate, was the proof I never wanted. And still, I didn't yell. I didn't break things. I didn't write long texts at 3 a.m. full of accusations. I printed the picture on map paper. I slid it between the divorce papers. And I waited for her to tell me the truth. She never did. I pulled into a grocery store parking lot. Just sat there with the engine running. My phone buzzed. It was her. No words. Just a single question mark. That was it. A question mark. Like she couldn't believe I'd actually left. Like she expected I'd be on the couch sulking, waiting for her to come back and explain how it was all just misunderstood. Like I wouldn't have the spine to follow through. And maybe she had every reason to believe that. I'd stayed when I shouldn't have. I'd forgiven little betrayals, lies about who she was texting, disappearing for weekends with work friends, mocking me to her sister when she thought I couldn't hear. I'd chalked it up to a phase. A rough patch. A storm we'd weather, eventually. But storms don't explain photo albums of another life she was building one weekend at a time. She thought I didn't see it coming because I never said anything. She thought silence meant ignorance. What she didn't understand is that I was collecting moments. I wasn't oblivious. I was just quiet. I watched the puzzle fall apart piece by piece until I knew exactly what was missing. Me. I didn't answer her text. Instead, I scrolled through the other photos Jenna had sent me. There were 4. One of them, taken from behind the fence, caught Lorna with her head on Clay's shoulder. She looked peaceful, lighter, as if she had finally unloaded the burden of pretending to love me. It didn't break my heart. Not anymore. It just emptied it. So I sent the photos to my lawyer, and I sent her another message. You were right. We were living separate lives. Yours just started a little earlier. Then I blocked her number. I don't know where I'm going to sleep tonight. Probably a motel off the interstate with stiff pillows and the hum of trucks outside. But I'll sleep without waiting for the door to open, without wondering who she's texting in the bathroom, without pretending I'm not alone when I'm lying right next to her. It's strange how freeing it feels. To finally stop hoping. To finally walk away. The motel I ended up in was the kind of place that doesn't pretend to be more than it is. Low-slung, flickering sign, one vending machine humming beside the ice machine, and a front desk clerk who looked like he hadn't cared about anything since the mid-90s. I paid in cash, not because I had to, but because something about this whole ordeal made me want to disappear as quietly as possible. The room smelled like lemon disinfectant and old curtains, but it had a bed and 4 walls, and for the first time in what felt like years, I didn't have to be around her. That alone made it feel like a luxury suite. I didn't sleep. Not really. I stared at the ceiling most of the night, trying to piece together when, exactly, everything started to unravel. It wasn't just Clay. No, Clay was the outcome, not the root. The truth is, I think Lorna started slipping away from me the moment I stopped being interesting to her. It sounds pathetic to admit that, but I remember the shift. I'd tell her about my day, something small, like a guy at work getting stuck in the elevator, and her eyes would drift to her phone, or she'd interrupt halfway through with, "Wait, did I tell you about Marla's engagement party?" She stopped seeing me. That's what it was. Not out of malice, but like how you stop noticing your fridge humming after a while. I became background noise, and I let it happen. That's the part one keep replaying now, over and over, how complicit I was in letting us rot from the inside. I'd known we were growing apart, and instead of pulling her back, I gave her space. But space isn't always generous. It's sometimes just the room they need to find someone else. Around 4 a.m., I checked her Instagram. I know, I shouldn't have, but I did. She'd posted a story hours earlier, a clinking glass of champagne with some string lights in the background. No caption, no location, just that little glowing toast to a new life. I stared at that boomerang for at least 5 minutes. In those 2 seconds of looping video, she looked more relaxed than I'd seen her in years. She didn't look like someone who regretted anything. I shut the phone off and stared at the ceiling until sunrise. Later that morning, I drove out to the lake. Not for anything poetic. I just needed somewhere that didn't smell like bleach and wet carpets. I sat on a bench near the boat ramp, drinking bad gas station coffee, watching the wind make little whirlpools in the water. A woman nearby was teaching her kid to skip stones, and he kept getting frustrated every time one sank with a sad little bloop. I found myself rooting for him quietly, like it somehow mattered. I guess I was desperate for anything to feel good again. Then my phone buzzed. It was a blocked number. I let it ring. Then again. A 3rd time. Finally, I answered. Silence for a second, and then her voice, too calm, too careful. "Ellis, can we talk?" I didn't say anything. I just listened. I didn't expect you to leave like that. I didn't think you'd. I don't know. Just vanish. More silence. I thought you'd yell. I thought you'd cry or demand answers. But you just left, and now I don't know what to do. That was it. That was her opening statement. Not an apology. Not an explanation. Just confusion that I didn't fall apart in front of her. And for the first time, I realized how deeply she misunderstood me. I wasn't silent because I was weak. I left because I finally knew she didn't deserve my words. So I said, "You already did what you needed to do. You chose him. I'm just finishing the part you didn't have the guts to." She tried to speak again, but I hung up. It felt surgical. Clean. Not satisfying exactly, but honest. And after months, no, years, of pretending everything was fine, honesty felt like oxygen. I sat there by the lake another hour, watching kids with fishing poles, old couples holding hands, ducks fighting over breadcrumbs. And it hit me, all at once, how many years I spent building a life that didn't actually include me in it. She was always the center, the planner, the spotlight. I was the reliable structure she could lean on until she found something more exciting. Well, she found it. And I found something else too. The freedom of finally being unwanted. It doesn't sound like much, but it's more than I had yesterday. I didn't return to the motel. I couldn't. Something about that room, the stale air, the stiff sheets, the silence, made it feel more like a holding cell than a refuge. Instead, I drove aimlessly until the gas gauge blinked at me in protest. I pulled into a rest stop that smelled like burnt coffee and road salt, grabbed a snack I didn't want, and sat outside at a cracked concrete table watching people come and go like ants in and out of someone else's crisis. That's the strange part no one tells you about betrayal, not the heartbreak, not the anger, but the stillness that follows. It's like standing in the ruins of a house you built with your bare hands and realizing you don't even have a broom. You just stand there, staring at the mess, unsure if you should start picking up the pieces or let the wind carry it all away. That afternoon, I got a message from her sister, Karen. She and I always had a weird truce. Not close, but not cold. We tolerated each other the way in-laws often do. She wrote, I heard. I'm so sorry. I had no idea it was this bad. And then, almost immediately after, actually, I lied. I knew something was off. I just didn't know how to tell you. I stared at that second message for a long time. My thumb hovered over the screen. I wanted to write back something biting, something like, thanks for nothing, or maybe a heads up would have been nice. But the truth was, what would it change? Karen wasn't the enemy. She was just another person who saw the fire from the hilltop and chose not to run toward the smoke. I finally responded with, appreciate you reaching out. Doesn't matter now. She sent a thumbs up emoji. I turned my phone face down. I checked into a small lakefront cabin that night. Off-season, empty, and overpriced. But it had wood-paneled walls and a porch swing and smelled like pine instead of mold. I didn't realize how badly I needed to hear frogs chirping and leaves brushing in the wind until I stepped outside that first night and just stood under the stars, letting the breeze touch my face like it hadn't in years. Inside, there was no TV, just a radio and a bookshelf full of old crime thrillers and dusty board games. I found an old journal in my bag, the one Lorna gave me years ago on my birthday, and that I'd never written in because I felt silly. I opened it to the first page and wrote one sentence. She was never really mine, and I was too cowardly to admit it. Then I kept writing. By midnight, I had 12 pages filled with everything I had held back over the years. Times she made me feel small in front of friends. Times I caught her flirting and convinced myself I was imagining it. The Christmas she forgot to get me anything and said, I thought we weren't doing gifts this year. The time I found a hotel key in her purse and she claimed it was a work thing. My body remembered every detail I had forced myself to swallow. And as I wrote, the sadness turned into something I didn't expect, relief. Not the triumphant kind. Not the kind you post about online. Just a quiet, almost holy peace. The kind that comes after finally telling the truth to yourself, even if nobody else hears it. The next morning, I woke up to rain tapping gently on the windows. The world felt washed. Still. No notifications. No drama. Just the sound of me breathing. Until I opened my email. There was a message waiting with the subject line, please read this. It was from Lorna. I don't know what I expected, a begging apology, a rationalization, maybe a list of all the reasons she thought I drove her away. But what I read wasn't that. It was worse. Ellis, it began. I know you probably hate me right now, but I need you to know that what you saw wasn't what you think. I did love you. For a long time, I really did. But at some point, I started to feel like your shadow. You never noticed me anymore. You never touched me unless I asked you to. You stopped laughing at my jokes. You became a hallway I walked through, not a home. I stopped reading for a second. My hands were trembling. She continued. I'm not saying that to excuse what I did. I know Clay is a mistake. I know it's messy. I know it's selfish. But he made me feel like I existed again. I needed to feel seen. And I just couldn't wait for you to notice I was drowning anymore. And just like that, she flipped the narrative. She was the victim. I was the distant, inattentive man who'd pushed her into someone else's arms. The pain in my chest didn't come from anger. It came from how easy it was to blame me, how convenient it was to recast me as the ghost in our story. She closed with, I don't want you to forgive me, but I hope one day you'll understand. Understand? Understand what? That she lied to my face for months? That she desecrated our marriage one flirtatious message at a time? That she thought her unmet emotional needs justified deceit? I didn't respond. Not because I didn't have anything to say, but because I finally realized she wasn't worth the cost of my words. Instead, I opened the window, let the rain in, and I wrote in the journal again. She was right. I didn't see her anymore. But not because I didn't care, because she was already walking away, and I was trying to look anywhere else so I didn't have to watch it happen. That page, I didn't rip out. That page, I folded and slid into my pocket. Maybe someday I'll burn it. But not yet. The rain didn't stop for 2 days. It poured with that steady kind of rhythm that makes the world feel muted, like nature itself was trying to drown out everything I didn't want to think about. I spent those days doing what I hadn't done in years, nothing. I didn't answer emails, didn't scroll through news, didn't check bank statements. I sat on the wooden porch swing, blanket around my shoulders, sipping whatever coffee I could stomach, and just watched the rain make rivers out of the dirt road. On the third morning, the clouds broke. The world sparkled, freshly rinsed. Birds started singing again. I took that as a sign. That afternoon, I drove back into town. Not to see her. Not to talk. Not to get closure. I'd realized something in that cabin. I didn't need closure from someone who never really opened up to me in the first place. But I did need to retrieve a few things from the house, the place I had once called mine. My name was still on the deed. My key still worked. But even as I approached, I knew it wasn't home anymore. It was a set, a shell, like an empty theater after the play ends and the audience leaves. I parked across the street. Her car wasn't in the driveway. Good. I didn't want drama. I didn't want another long speech. I didn't want her tears or excuses or that vague, performative guilt she was so good at performing. I just wanted to grab the things that mattered and disappear again. I opened the door and was immediately hit by a smell I couldn't place. Lavender candles? Maybe sage. Something she used to light only when she was trying to change the mood, either after a fight or right before guests arrived. But this time, it felt artificial, like covering a stain with perfume. I walked inside and stopped. Everything was rearranged. The living room couch had been moved. The rug was different. My framed photo from the Grand Canyon trip we took back in 2015, gone. The bookshelf I built from scratch in our second year of marriage had been replaced with some sleek IKEA thing that looked like it came out of a catalog. The house was the same, but it had been erased, sanitized. Any trace of me, gone. That's when I heard it. A man's laugh. Upstairs. It was faint, not obnoxious, but unmistakably there. My breath caught. I didn't move. I stood frozen for what felt like a full minute, trying to decide whether I'd actually heard it or if my mind was just cruelly echoing what I feared most. Then her voice. Lorna's voice. Soft. Playful. She giggled. Not the kind of laugh you give someone when you're talking about groceries. The kind of laugh that comes when you're half-dressed and feeling bold. The kind of laugh I hadn't heard from her in years. I should have left. I really should have. But I didn't. I walked up the stairs like a ghost. Slowly. Quietly. Every step creaked like it was warning me. At the top, I paused by the door to her bedroom. It was cracked open. I peeked through the gap. Clay was there. Shirtless. Wearing my old pajama pants. Lorna was on the bed, scrolling through her phone, barefoot, grinning. They didn't see me. They were so comfortable. So casual. So at home. As if I had never existed. There was a backpack on the floor, his, I assumed. Open. Inside, I could see a toothbrush, a charger, and a small plastic bag with something that looked like supplements. This wasn't new. He'd been staying there. Living there, probably. While I was gone licking my wounds and journaling in a damp cabin, he moved into my life like it was an Airbnb. I stepped back. Carefully. My heart pounding, but not with rage. With finality. This was it. The last confirmation I needed. Not just that she cheated, but that I was replaceable. Easily. Painlessly. They didn't warn me. They filled the space before I had even closed the door behind me. I walked downstairs, grabbed my passport, the box of keepsakes I'd come for, old letters from my mom, a watch my grandfather left me, and the keys to the garage where I used to work on my motorcycle. That was all I needed. I didn't leave a note. I didn't slam a door. I didn't key his car, though part of me thought about it. I just walked out. Back in the car, I sat behind the wheel and stared ahead at nothing for a full 10 minutes. Then I laughed. It wasn't joyful. It was the laugh of a man who's officially run out of illusions. Because here's what no one tells you about being cheated on. It's not just the betrayal that hurts. It's the realization that they were capable of being this happy without you. That the version of them you loved wasn't the whole picture. That you were, perhaps, never actually loved the way you thought. I didn't drive back to the cabin. I didn't even leave town. Instead, I went somewhere I hadn't been in years, my dad's old garage. It had been locked up since he passed. I still had the key on my chain. Inside, it smelled like oil and sawdust and rusted memories. But it was real. And it was mine. Nobody had touched it. Nobody had filled it with new furniture or new laughter. It didn't feel like much, but it felt like a start. And for the first time in weeks, I felt something close to solid ground beneath my feet. The garage wasn't much to look at from the outside, just a rust-streaked structure wedged between a row of overgrown hedges and a crumbling gravel drive, but stepping inside that dusty space felt like taking a breath after being underwater for too long. It smelled like forgotten years, like grease-stained denim and metal shavings and old leather. My father's tools were still arranged just the way he'd left them. Wrenches hanging from hooks like a mechanical museum. A cracked stool in the corner, its cushion flat as a pancake. A faded calendar on the wall, stuck on October 2012, the month he passed. I didn't cry. I didn't need to. The place didn't demand tears. It welcomed me with quiet familiarity, like a friend who didn't ask where you've been or why your life looks like a car crash. It just gave me space to sit. I found the tarp covering my old motorcycle, pulled it off like unveiling some ancient relic. The seat was cracked, the chain rusted, tires flat, but it was still there, still mine. I built that bike piece by piece back when Lorna and I first got married, before we had money for real vacations and before separate lives became a phrase she could say without flinching. I ran my fingers along the handlebars and thought, without irony, this machine had outlasted my marriage. I spent hours that afternoon cleaning the garage, like scrubbing oil stains could somehow wash away the last 13 years. It was mindless work, but that was the point. I needed to do something with my hands. Something that didn't involve reading emotional postmortems from the woman who replaced me mid-sentence. When I finally sat down on the floor, back against the wall, sun setting through the tiny high window, I noticed a dusty old radio tucked behind a crate of spark plugs. I plugged it in. Static hissed to life. After some careful dialing, an old country station cut through the fuss. A woman with a twang sang about pouring coffee into a cracked cup and watching a man she once loved walk away. The timing felt absurd. Too on the nose. But I sat there and let her sing. And for a moment, I felt something shift. Not closure, God. I hate that word. But clarity. I hadn't just lost a wife. I'd lost my mirror. Because for over a decade, I'd measured my worth through her eyes, through her smiles, her silences, her shrinking patience. And now, without her gaze, I didn't know how to see myself. I was just a man alone in a garage with a dead radio and a rusted-out bike. And yet, I was still here, still breathing, still capable of rebuilding. I slept there that night, curled up on a rolled tarp like some defeated war vet. But I slept through the night for the first time in weeks. No dreams, no midnight spirals, just sleep. When I woke, there were messages on my phone. Again. This time, it wasn't Lorna. It was Clay. Yes, Clay. He found my number somehow. Probably through Lorna's phone. Maybe even while lounging in my old pajama pants. The message was short. Ellis, I think we need to talk. Man to man. I stared at it for a full 10 minutes, not sure whether I should laugh or punch a wall. What kind of man cheats with another man's wife, moves into his house, and then decides they need to have a chat? But I was curious. Against my better judgment, I was curious. So I texted back. Sure. Let's talk. You pick the place. He responded almost instantly. Coffee and company on Maple. Noon. I replied, see you there. What was I doing? I didn't know. But something in me needed to see him. Not for closure. Not even for confrontation. I just needed to see the man she chose. The man who slipped into my life while I was still living it. Maybe to understand what I lacked, or maybe just to confirm that he wasn't as impressive as he seemed in all those filtered photos. The next day, I dressed in the only clean clothes I had, worn jeans, a flannel shirt, boots still dusted from the garage. I didn't shave. Didn't bother fixing the bags under my eyes. I arrived at the coffee shop 10 minutes early. He was already there, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups of coffee. He stood when he saw me, tall, broad-shouldered, clean haircut, crisp gray sweater like he'd walked out of a men's magazine. He smiled, awkwardly. Ellis. Yeah. We shook hands. I sat down. He didn't speak right away. Neither did I. And then, Finally, he said something I'll never forget. I didn't know she was married when we started. That was his opening line. And it was a lie. Because I saw the messages. The ones where she mentioned me. The ones where she called me a good guy who will probably never leave. He sipped his coffee and continued. She told me later. Said you were more like a roommate by that point. That you wouldn't care. But I see now that was wrong. I kept my eyes on him. I didn't blink. I let him talk. I'm not trying to justify anything. I wanted you to know I'm not the monster you probably think I am. I nodded slowly. Then I leaned in and asked, has she lied to you yet? He blinked. What? Has she changed her stories? Left out parts? Spun things to make herself look softer? He didn't answer. So I smiled. Give it time. I stood up, left my untouched coffee on the table, walked out into the afternoon sun without another word. I didn't need to tell him anything. He'd learn on his own. And I had better things to do than help a stranger unravel the woman I spent a decade trying to understand. I didn't go back to the garage after meeting Clay. I needed space from everything, even the dust and oil that had started to feel like comfort. So I drove out to the cliffs. Just beyond the city limits there's this overlook, nothing fancy, just a stretch of worn dirt and a shaky wooden railing, but it gives you the best view of the river curling around the edge of the valley. I used to bring Lorna there. Not for anything romantic. It was just a spot we'd go when we didn't want to talk. We'd sit in silence, watching the water, pretending that peace between us was the same as connection. But this time, I was alone. And it was better that way. I parked, sat on the hood of my car, and let the wind hit me in the face like it was trying to slap the memories out of my head. I watched a hawk circle above the trees. I watched the sun go from bright gold to the kind of bruised purple that only shows up in late September. It felt surreal, like I was floating between the wreckage of what was and the uncertainty of whatever came next. Then my phone buzzed again. I almost threw it. But curiosity wins more than it should. This time, it was from a name I hadn't seen in years. Hey, it's Melanie. I just heard what happened. Are you okay? Melanie. God. She and I dated briefly in college. We were friends after. Kind of. We'd stayed in touch on and off for a few years until life got noisy and people drifted like they do. I hadn't heard from her in, 6 years? I stared at her message for a long time before replying. I've been better. How did you hear? Her answer came fast. My cousin works with Lorna. Word travels. Of course it did. I'd forgotten how fast gossip spreads when people smell tragedy. I suddenly imagined them whispering in break rooms, passing around secondhand quotes like, I heard he just packed up and vanished, or she said he never really listened to her. I bet some even took sides. Melanie followed up with, if you want to talk, or just scream into a phone, I'm here. I almost dismissed it. Thought maybe it was just pity, or curiosity, or boredom. But something in her message felt different. No pressure. No judgment. No unsolicited advice. Just presence. So I texted, not sure I'm ready to talk yet. But thank you. That means more than you know. She replied with a single heart emoji and nothing more. And strangely, that tiny gesture, simple and quiet, did more for me than all of Lorna's long-winded explanations combined. I drove back into town around 9. Stopped for gas. The clerk behind the counter looked half asleep, didn't even glance at me as I swiped my card. But as I stood there waiting for the pump to finish, something across the street caught my eye. It was my house. Lit up. Blinds open. And there she was. Lorna. Dancing. Alone in the living room. Music playing from the speakers I installed 3 years ago. Barefoot. Glass of wine in hand. Spinning slowly like the world outside didn't exist. And then Clay walked in. He handed her a second glass. She laughed. Tipped her head back. Said something that made him smile. It felt staged. Like a commercial for some life insurance plan promising you joy after 40. I turned away before they could see me. Not because it hurt, but because it didn't. That scared me a little. The numbness. The way my heart didn't race. My fists didn't clench. It was like watching actors in a play I'd already seen too many times. I knew how it ended. I knew all the lines. And I didn't want a ticket anymore. I drove back to the cabin that night, not the motel, not the garage. I needed air. Trees. Space that didn't echo her voice. And once I got there, I lit a fire, opened that old journal, and started writing again. But this time, it wasn't about her. It wasn't about Clay. It was about me. Not the version of me she remembered, or the version I became to keep her from leaving, but the version that existed before all of it, before the compromises, before the silence, Before, I thought loving someone meant shrinking to fit into whatever space they allowed. I wrote about the things I missed, the hobbies I dropped, the books I stopped reading, the friends I ghosted because she didn't like them, the road trip I never took because she was too tired, the version of me who used to laugh at dumb movies and didn't triple-check texts to avoid starting a fight. I wrote until my hand ached, and then I read it all out loud to the fire. Not because the fire needed to hear it, but because I did. I'm not healed, not even close. I still flinch when I think about what she said. Still wake up wondering if it was all a dream. But for the first time, I'm starting to remember what it feels like to have my voice again. And that's something. Tomorrow, I'll wake up early. Maybe go hike the ridge. Maybe I'll call Melanie. Maybe I won't. I'm not rushing toward anything anymore. I'm just learning how to stand still without falling apart. And that, after everything, is a start. The next morning, I woke to the kind of quiet that doesn't demand anything from you. No phone buzzing with someone else's drama. No footsteps upstairs reminding me I wasn't enough. Just sunlight slipping through the trees, casting slow-moving patterns across the wood floor of the cabin. The air smelled like pine and coffee I had put on a pot without even realizing it, like my hands remembered peace before my mind did. I sat on the porch with my mug and watched a squirrel dart across the clearing like it had somewhere more important to be. And for the first time in months, I wasn't haunted by what I'd lost. I was curious about what came next. It's strange, isn't it? How grief can quietly give birth to hope. Later that day, I finally did something I'd been avoiding. I logged into our joint bank account and separated my name. Closed it out. Started a new one in my own name. Then I filed the last bit of paperwork with my lawyer, checked the final boxes, and pressed submit. Just like that, the marriage became a file number. There was no fanfare. No dramatic music. Just a quiet little email confirming that the thing I thought would define the rest of my life was now a legal formality. I thought I'd cry. Instead, I smiled. Not because I was happy it ended, but because I was proud that I'd finally stopped pretending it hadn't already been over. Later that week, I got a message from Melanie again. She asked if I was ready to talk. I said yes. We agreed to meet at a local diner that hadn't changed since the early 2000s. She was already sitting at the counter when I walked in, hoodie, messy bun, no makeup, and yet somehow still glowing. She looked at me and said, "You look lighter." And I said, "I feel like me again, or at least someone who might find his way back to that." We talked for 3 hours. Not about Lorna. Not really. About life. About the books she'd read lately. About the terrible coffee at that diner and why we both secretly loved it. It wasn't romantic. Not yet. But it didn't need to be. It was human. And kind. And honest. And it reminded me that not every connection has to burn to be real. When I got back to the garage a few days later, I uncovered the motorcycle again. I started rebuilding it, this time not to escape, but just to create. Every bolt I tightened, every smudge of grease on my hands, it felt like stitching something back together in myself. Not to forget the past, but to carry it differently. I still write in the journal. Not every day. Just when something moves me. When I see a sunset that doesn't feel hollow. When I laugh at something dumb. When I remember that healing isn't about pretending nothing happened, it's about knowing you survived anyway. Lorna never reached out again. Maybe she understood it was truly over. Or maybe she didn't care. Either way, I stopped waiting for closure from her. I realized I already gave it to myself the day I walked out without screaming. The day I let go without needing an audience. Now, months later, I'm still learning how to be alone, but not lonely. I'm rebuilding, slowly, beautifully, with each quiet day that passes. I'm not the same man who begged for scraps of affection in his own kitchen. I'm better. Because I learned that peace isn't something someone else hands you. It's something you build yourself. And for the first time in a long, long time, I'm home.